Bill S-243, Climate-Aligned Finance Act. Canadian climate activist senators threaten your future. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and I want to walk you through some information about a bill that's proposed from the Senate from a group of climate activists, senators, and a group of endorsers, which includes a number of very big investment firms and lots of Canadian environmental, non-governmental organizations. I'm going to quote from an article written by Joe Oliver in the Financial Post to try and give you some insights into the implications of this bill and why it is so detrimental to Canada's future and your way of life, our way of life. So let me show you what I found. The Senate is supposed to be the chamber of sober second thought. So once a bill comes from the House of Commons, this is where other eyes are supposed to look at it and give, say, a second opinion, evaluate some other implications, offer some changes or amendments. But in this case, Joe Oliver writes, will the Liberals adopt an unhinged Senate bill discouraging fossil fuel investment? He says the bill would undermine free markets, the energy sector, and the Canadian economy. And this is the article. It's actually the antithesis of sober second thought, in my view. He writes, Bill S-243, the Climate-Aligned Finance Act, is the antithesis of thoughtful reconsideration. Its declared purpose is to regulate investment practices so as to reduce the risks both that financial institutions pose to the climate and that climate change poses to financial institutions. But in fact, it would undermine free markets with potentially debilitating consequences for financial institutions, the energy sector, and the Canadian economy in general. Climate senators are a group of activist and unrealistic people. Now, it's the Honorable Senator Rosa Galvez who's promoting this Climate-Aligned Finance Act. And she says that we've seen a major ramping up of net zero commitments from the public and private sector, but we must face the elephant in the room. Our financial system continues to fund activities that fuel climate risk. So here's the bill. Bill S-243, an act to enact the Climate-Aligned Finance Act and to make related amendments to other acts. Now, they've been working on this for a long time. Since May 2022, 89 Canadian and international organizations have signed on to a call for action and endorsed Independent Senator Rosa Galvez Bill S-243, the Climate-Aligned Finance Act, in order to move Canada towards a climate-aligned, stable, low-carbon financial system. So this endorsement initiative was spearheaded by Environmental Defense. And you can see there's various academic groups, Oxfam, the Trottier Family Foundation, Democracy Watch, Fédération des Travailleurs et des Travailleuses du Québec, and they recognize that Canada's financial sector needs to align with Canada's climate commitments if the country is to achieve its climate goals. Let's see if that's true. So here are some quotes and some logos of groups supporting this act. You can see here that many of these are major pension funds or investment firms, some big charities like the Trottier Family Foundation. And you can see here that now we move into more of the ENGOs, all kinds of them here, Environmental Defense, CanRac, Eco-Justice, Shift, Corporate Knights, etc., Stand Earth. And here we see that Catherine McKenna is saying, Senator Galvez, you are my hero for your constant focus on practical climate action, including climate-aligned finance. Well, we'll see how practical it actually is. But you can see here more of the supporters: Pembina Institute, Equiterre, David Suzuki Foundation. So all the activists are there. And we can see that Elizabeth May loves it. I'm absolutely in favor of Senator Galva's bill S243. It's such an important bill. I hope that the Senate will vote in favor of it and that we'll be ready as MPs to make the effort for a bill that will work. We're united in the goal of getting Canada's role in climate finance to meet the task. And there's nothing more urgent and nothing more important. Oh, really? Well, people in the West will certainly note that many of the endorsers are part of the decades-long foreign-funded tar sands campaign, and blocking finance to fossil fuels has been part of their activities for 20 years, 30 years. Now, Joe Oliver writes that this is like climate change dogma over investment expertise. He says, Independent Senator Rosa Galva's private member's bill could have legs if the government decides the time is right to ratchet up its climate agenda by muscling in on the financial sector. After all, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault, has never been a model of restraint. At a minimum, the bill shows how far some parliamentarians are prepared to take us down the road of climate change dogmatism. And it creates market distortions, plus expensive capital. So Oliver also writes, the bill itself mandates specific increased capital risk weights of 1,250% for debt exposure to new fossil fuel resources or infrastructure, and 150% or more for any loan to an existing fossil fuel activity. This arbitrarily increases the amount of capital a bank must hold for the credit and market risks of a given loan. So, do people realize that Canada is in the top 10 of oil producers? These are all of our competitor nations. Any one of them would love to see us completely knocked off world markets, because that 5.5% share that's noted here, that's from 2018, that would then be distributed to any one of them or all of them. And people don't really realize that oil pays the bills for Canadians. While the energy sector GDP in Alberta in 2020 was the highest in Canada at $59.6 billion, it was significant in all provinces, including Ontario, $15.6 billion, Quebec, $12.0 billion, British Columbia, $11.8 billion, and Saskatchewan with $10.5 billion. So that's a lot of money that would be missing if we have these kind of measures in place that are going to limit financing of fossil fuel infrastructure and development. So, there's this myth of stranded assets, which is what really this climate-aligned finance thing is based on, that presumably banks or investment firms would invest in a fossil fuel project or a mining project, and then because of the rapid decarbonization of the world, that funding and those assets would be stranded and nobody would want them anymore. But in fact, if you look at the world population by region, you find that North America and Europe are only 15% of the world's population. The rest of the world are emerging nations. And these nations are going gangbusters. They are the giants that are going to be arising. And this report by Robert Lyman shows the real world of GHG emissions and growth. So the growth will be happening in places like Asia, which has 4 times the population of us in the West. Now, within the Bill S243, mitigations like carbon capture won't count. Activists will get corporate board positions and energy experts will be excluded. So these are some comments from a research colleague, that it won't matter if companies have carbon capture in place, because the goal here isn't net zero, but rather absolute zero emissions from fossil fuels. Furthermore, it mandates certain characteristics of boards and directors. There must be at least one person with climate expertise, the definition of which will embed an activist on every corporate board. And it mandates that a board member may not own shares in any entity that's not in alignment with climate commitments, nor can a board member have in the past 5 years engaged in any activities related to lobbying for any kind of energy project. So of course the ENGOs love it because, the world is now populated quite a few climate activists. Lots of young people grow up saying, yeah, I want to be a climate activist when I grow up. But is there going to be a job for them? Well, this is job creation for all those climate activists. But, most of them are not actually climate experts. They're activists. They're not actual scientists. And most scientists that we know would not agree with them that we're facing any kind of a crisis or that we need to have an activist on a board of directors. And in fact, as you saw there, it would also limit people with energy expertise from being on any of these boards, which is absurd. I mean, you want to have people on your board who know the industry because it's fairly complex. You don't want to have people on the board who are ideologues because they'll make terrible decisions and you'll get reduced profits and bankruptcies and corporate disasters will follow. So Bill S-243 hands China a Made in China 2025 total advantage. You have to realize that Canada only puts out a tiny amount of GHGs in the world. So China emits in 1 month about what Canada emits in a year and a half. So for Canada, climate targets equal a futile folly because we're not going to change anything in the world. And China will keep producing and emitting. Like 30% of the emissions in the world come from China. From Canada, it's 1.5%. And people have to realize also that in terms of geopolitics, there's a rare metals war going on. Now, China plans to be the world's factory by 2025 and to dominate the world by 2049. So, they want to be dominant in all these industries. They need rare earth minerals and they need energy for that, or they need to block others from having it in order to have dominance. And of course, this came out a while ago that President Xi's vow of world dominance by 2049 sends a chill through markets. Yeah, that's kind of scary. Now, Canada has been counting on a future in the clean energy world by developing all of these rare earth minerals and rare metals that we have in abundance. But Bill S-243 means critical minerals will be a pipe dream, as will be oil, natural gas, and coal development. So again, a quote from Joe Oliver's article, the bill targets federal financial crown corporations, banks, trust and loan companies, pension funds, and credit unions. It covers every type of debt or equity financing of exploration, extraction, production, transportation, storage, exportation, refining, or retailing of oil, gas, or coal and their combustion for energy generation in a power plant. Basically everything Canada needs to remain an industrial society. You have to remember that mining accounts for 6 to 10% of global energy consumption. So people should follow John Lee Pettimore because he's a retired mining mechanic and he shows people what it's really like on the ground. And so this enormous piece of mining equipment, he writes here, the 980 runs 2 engines, each 2,000 horsepower. Each engine burns approximately 120 gallons per hour or 2,880 gallons per 12-hour shift, or 2 million gallons per year. That's for each engine. You can't make green energy without a lot of diesel fuel. And of course, if If the dream is to have wind and solar power the world, to get wind power you need oil. And this is an article by Václav Smil, who is an expert in that area. Now, within the Bill S-243, there are a number of scientifically inaccurate claims, like claims that we must meet Paris Agreement target. Well, Paris Agreement is voluntary, and the 1.5 degrees C target is political and not scientific. And you can find that reference here. The 2 degree and 1.5 degree C targets are political goals and not scientific ones. So it's not necessary to meet them anyway. The IPCC AR6 Physical Sciences Working Group 1 report of August 2021 dialed back catastrophic claims, most of which were based on the implausible scenario known as RCP 8.5. Climate emergency and climate crisis were only mentioned once in the IPCC AR6 WG1 report, and that was in regard to media coverage. Bill S-243 uses the political definition of climate change and not the scientific definition of the IPCC. So what I'm saying is that it's a politicized bill and really has nothing to do with climate science. And just so you know what the RCP 8.5 is that I was talking about, this is a quote from Roger Pielke Jr. after he reviewed the IPCC AR6 Working Group 1 report. Great news! The extreme scenario that the IPCC saw as most likely in 2013 is now judged low likelihood. So if we get rid of this, the climate emergency is over. We can also get rid of this one. It's also implausible. So we do have time. See, if you look at the screen here, you can see that there's actually no emergency, is there? Not to mention, it's impossible to meet any climate targets when massive immigration increases Canada's carbon footprint. So I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but there is a policy called the Century Initiative, whereby Canada intends to have 100 million population by 2100. So Darshan Maharaja did the math for us on that, and it's pretty spooky. Per capita emissions of CO2 in Canada was 16.58 tons in 2016. At that time, the current population was 37 million. It's now 40 million. So adding another 63 million people to bring it up to 100 would increase our CO2 emissions by 1.05 billion tons yearly. And he says, I'm not even going to go near the supply of housing and services. Darshan has a great blog, so I invite people to have a look at his very thoughtful commentaries. So obviously, it's impossible to meet any climate targets when massive immigration increases Canada's carbon footprint. So no matter what corporations might do to align themselves to climate targets, it would be completely undone by immigration. But in fact, there are many uncertainties in greenhouse gas-induced climate change. We probably don't have to do any of these turning into pretzels to meet climate targets. Dr. Madhav Kandekar is our scientific advisor in Canada, and he's a former Environment Canada research scientist for 40 years, a past IPCC expert reviewer, a WMO regional expert. He's a long-term member of CMOS, the Canadian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society. And in the year 2000, Dr. Kandekar was commissioned by the Alberta government to do an evaluation of the science that is said to support the Kyoto Accord. His report, Uncertainties in Greenhouse Gas-Induced Climate Change, is here. Surprisingly, these uncertainties have not changed much in 18 years, and he says there are many more uncertainties. That's what he's saying. So governments have used hot, modeled simulation to set climate policies, but they do not reflect reality. And you can see this video with him. We've got quite a few videos with Dr. Kandekar. And he's a very common sense, down-to-earth scientist. He's not an activist. And another recent publication is that of Dr. Judith Curry. who wrote Climate Uncertainty and Risk, Rethinking Our Response. She's also not at all alarmist as the senators are. And she wrote in one of her blog posts that thinking that catastrophes like major hurricane landfalls, massive forest fires, etc., will be cured by eliminating fossil fuel emissions is laughable. Well, it's not really funny. Thinking that eliminating fossil fuel emissions will solve the problem of extreme weather events is very sad, sort of on the level of doing rain dances. Everything that goes wrong, they blame on fossil fuel-driven climate change. Imagine how surprised they would be if we were ever to be successful at eliminating fossil fuel emissions. And then we still had bad weather. So true. Now, in 2014, Dr. Judith Curry was one of the few people in the world who stood up and said, you know what, based on the evidence, carbon dioxide is not a control knob that can fine-tune climate. 2014, she said that. And you may be wondering, well, then why didn't all the climate hysteria stop then? Well, it's because there are conflicts of interest which abound in the climate world, especially in climate finance. So these green billionaires and a group of environmental organizations wrote up this risky business report, which proliferated through the financial community. And that's where the climate emergency comes from. They're all using the RCP 8.5 implausible scenario and claiming that it's business as usual. So we have a divergence between actual climate science and climate finance. And of course, these people are all interested in things like carbon markets. Excuse me. So we need to say no to climate CO2 coercion. And to do that, we invite you to join us this fall, October the 17th, to break free from climate tyranny with evidence over ideology. This is going to be our first in-person event, live event, at McMahon Stadium at the Red and White Club since COVID. So we are very pleased that Robert Lyman, energy economist, is making a return visit. And his topic will be, when will climate policy hit the wall? And Dr. Ian Clark, Emeritus Professor, will be speaking on a reality check on climate and net zero. So it's a full evening. It goes from 6 in the evening till 9. There's a buffet dinner included in your ticket. There's free parking after 6 p.m., easy LRT access, and right now we have early bird ticketing, which ends July 31st. So please get your tickets now. When Robert Lyman was here in 2017, his topic was, can Canada survive climate change policy? At the time he was quite hopeful, but he's not as hopeful now. So he really did want to have a chance to come back and talk with us about what's happened in the interim and the risks that we're facing. So the other speaker, Dr. Clark, was part of our very first documentary, which we did way back in early 2000s. It's called Climate Catastrophe Cancelled. And Dr. Clark talks about how for many years he taught sort of the mainstream anthropogenic global warming theory in class. And then he did some more research with a few other colleagues and realized, wait a minute, CO2 is not the main driver of climate change. It's not the control knob. So he's one of the few academics who actually stood up and said, you know what, I'm going to change my mind. I was wrong. So he'll have a very interesting talk for us as well. So I hope you can join us for the live event, and I hope that you can make your views known to whoever needs to know about Bill S-243, the Senate Climate Activist Bill, because it will be very destructive to the Canadian economy and will simply hand competitor nations much more market share and will embolden China to do exactly what they've planned to do, which is to be the world's factory by 2025, to win the rare metals war, and to dominate the world by 2049. So think about those things and ask yourself, why is the Canadian Senate helping China to dominate the world? So I hope you can come to our event. Log on to our website, www.friendsofscience.org. Have a look at the ticketing. You can join us, you can become a member, and you can also, if you want, send us a little birthday present. It's our 21st year of operation. You can just send us an e-transfer. $21 would be great, to contact@friendsofscience.org. That's contact@friendsofscience.org. Just a little gift if you can. And if not, please share our material. We're very happy to have people like and subscribe and share our material. And please put some comments down below. I always like to look at the comments and see what people are thinking. If you have questions, you can send them to media@friendsofscience.org, or you can just put them in the comments, and I try to go through there a couple of times a week. Thanks very much for watching the presentation. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.